Well, hi, it's me again. Nice to see you too. So, I was not going to do this video because it's like the middle of January right now, right? It's like January 12th when I'm recording this. But I saw that a different booktuber, Reading Riley, she posted her December wrap up like yesterday or the day before. And honestly, my channel, I get to do what I want, right? So, let's talk about the books I read in December because a lot of them were really good. So, I have some coffee with me. Let's get into it. So I read 15 books in December. These are some of them. And I guess I'll start from the top to the bottom. So at the very top of my stack is the Hacienda by Isabel Cañas. This was the last book I read in 2022. I wasn't really a fan of this. It was okay. I thought it was fine. I gave it 3 stars out of 5. I wasn't a fan of the writing. Thought the first 40 pages were incredibly dull, incredibly slow. You know, when things started happening in the house, it became interesting, and I feel like the priest character in particular, I really liked his perspective, and I really liked some of the commentary and thoughts he had about religion and faith, and I thought all of that was quite interesting. There was like a good 200 section page in the middle that I thought was like quite strong. And I enjoyed the middle part of this book a lot. Wasn't a fan of the beginning, and I thought the end wasn't as climactic or interesting as I would have liked it to be. And unfortunately, as with many haunted house stories, this one kind of suffers the same thing that I feel like all of them do. These ghosts have these abilities, or like ghosts have abilities like to hurt people and cause physical harm, but like they never do. And there is one scene where someone gets physically hurt. Okay, you were able to do that this one time. Can you please do this again? It's just like, it's just horrible plot armor, and I just really hate how ghosts, which can be very scary, are never depicted the right way because they just, like, for plot, like, nothing can happen to the characters, right? Or, like, when you do see graphic things, I hate it when you see something graphic, it's just like a vision. And, like, it goes away, and it just never comes back. I find that so lazy. I really, really, really don't like that. And this book has a lot of it. There are positive things to it. Like, it's not a complete waste of time. It's not for me, but there are people who would like this, and there are people who would because it nearly won the Goodreads Best Horror of 2022. So it is what it is. Next, I read Yerba Buena by Nina Lacour. I read Watch Over Me, a previous novel of hers, in November. I love that book. I cannot speak highly enough about Watch Over Me. It is one of the most moving and beautiful books I have ever read. Watch Over Me is hands down the best young adult book I have read so far. I will read any Nina Lacour book at this point just because of Watch Over Me. I love it. So I only discovered that Yerba Buena was released this year, like the middle of December. I got really lucky. I got this in the mail by the end of the year. Yerba Buena, was it as good as Watch Over Me? Of course not. It's going to be very difficult for any book, like for most books, to be as good as that one for me. But Yerba Buena was still just a really strong, well-written book that just really crushed me emotionally. Like, this is why I love Nina Lacour. I love all the sad, I love the sad girl vibes. I love just like the quiet, contemplative nature of the ways her characters just think and approach life and the way that they do things and the way that they interact with their grief, the way that they interact with their struggles, how they overcome or try to overcome. Do they succeed? Will they succeed? It all just kind of depends. And this one is just, I feel like, a much more affirming book than Watch Over Me. Like, Watch Over Me ended in kind of like, for me at least, it ended in kind of like tense way. But this one, it ends, I guess, kind of similarly. Like, you don't know. Like, the ending is a bit inconclusive, although I read it as a positive one because it's about like a relationship, a sapphic relationship between these two women who come across each other in their 20s, and like just over the course of several years they build a relationship together, and they meet each other when life calls for them to be together, and it's just a really beautiful story. I loved it. Not quite 5 stars. I gave it 4.75 out of 5. Really good book. I would read this again. Next, Kiss Her Once for Me by Alison Cochrun. I read this actually on Christmas Eve, and this is not it, honey. This is not it. The thing is, I loved her first book, The Charm Offensive. Like, that book, for me, amazing. I love The Charm Offensive. I will praise The Charm Offensive all day, all night, up and down the streets. It is a fantastic queer rom-com with crazy situations and crazy, fun, wild characters because that's just the premise. So Kiss Her Once for me is different because we're actually in a very normal situation. Like, there's like a woman working at a coffee shop in Seattle. She has very little money. She's struggling for very real world issues, and then she comes across some rich guy and he's like, let's get fake married. They get drunk and they get fake married. I don't listen. I don't get it. Like, I don't get the appeal of fake dating. I don't get marriages of convenience. I don't get why people care about this trope. Like, this trope is just so, is this romantic? But why? The thing is, the twist in this book is that the woman is actually in love with his sister, and like they met once. They had one day together. One. Oh, and by the way, the woman is demisexual, asexual. She's somewhere on the ace spectrum, and she fell in love with this girl after one day, which I've seen a lot of asexual people complain about because it's just unrealistic. Although I guess that's just like the power of love, I guess. I don't know. Just a lot of just stuff like doesn't work. And just a lot of the premise is just like not great. And then like I don't really care for the protagonist either. She's not a protagonist for me. She's a bit annoying. I'm not a huge fan of the protagonist. I'm not a huge fan of the relationship that the two sapphic leads have. Not just a big fan of their dynamic because they've only known each other for like a week by the almost end of this book. Like they've spent a total of like 5 days together, and a lot of it not even like that much together, and they're just like so like in love. I don't know. Kiss Her Once for me is also set in Christmas time. I read this on Christmas Eve, and even though I am not a Christmas person at all, I read this trying to like kind of get a little bit in the mood, a little bit in the spirit, and it's just yeah, there is no real plot to this. The main things that happen once like the plot gets moving is just like doing Christmas things like making cookies, decorating a tree. I just was really underwhelmed by this book. I gave it like 3.25 out of 5 stars when I read this initially. Thinking back on it, I probably don't like it that much. But the thing is, Alison Cochrun is just such a good writer. Like, I love her writing. I will continue to read her books. I think she just wanted to make a quick, simple, fun holiday romance, and she did that. And it's not a masterpiece by any means, but there are a lot of very beautifully written passages in this about the nature of relationships and the nature of love, which I feel was so astute and well written and well said. So Alison has a lot of very interesting and beautiful things about love in this book, which is why I gave it 3.25 out of 5. And because there are some characters in the book which I did enjoy. The family members of the guy that she's like fake marrying or whatever, they're hilarious. They're super fun. But yeah, no, I didn't care much for this. On second thought, I might lower my rating to like a 3 instead of a 3.25. Next, we have Fiona and Jane by Jean Chen Ho. I really enjoyed this. This was a really good book. This book is about the two titular characters, Fiona and Jane. They are the children of Taiwanese immigrants. They're Taiwanese American. And yeah, this book broaches a lot of very interesting topics about immigrants in the United States, the Taiwanese experience as well, the Taiwanese American experience in particular, their struggles as people. They both are very different people, but they've been friends since they were children. This chronicles their relationship and their life over the course of about 30 years. And it's not perfect. I mean, there are a couple things like I would have changed. Like there could have been more between Fiona and Jane, in my opinion. It's pretty similar with Yerba, Buena. Like that, there could have been more between the two. Like there could have been more between the two female leads. Overall, really solid book. I would give this like a 4.5, 4.25. Really good. Really recommend it. Great stuff. Next, Ophelia After All by Racquel Marie. Ophelia After All was such a pleasant surprise for me because I knew that this was going to be about, I knew that this was a YA going in, and I'm usually don't have the highest expectations for young adult books because I'm just simply not in the demographic. But I loved what this book had to say about the experiences of different people, of different types of people on the LGBTQ spectrum. So in addition to great queer representation, this book also has great Latinx representation. And that's also important for me because even though I don't speak Spanish, I am half Puerto Rican at the very least. I think there's other stuff in there as well. I don't really know what my background is, but I am half Puerto Rican. And there is a Puerto Rican character in this, and she is also queer. And it just made me feel something so warm and beautiful to see someone who shares my heritage and also be queer in a book for the very first time. And I just thought this was just like a really sometimes funny, really heartwarming, and sometimes emotional book as well, which normally shouldn't be for me because I'm not really that interested in what teenagers are doing in high school. And a lot of the book is basically leading up to prom, which again, like none of this should work for me because I don't really care about all of that, but this book does have some surprises and it does have a lot of really smart commentary, various topics like Shakespeare. There's a lot of references to Hamlet. There's just great conversations about coming out and dealing with homophobia and just being yourself. And I love this book. This was great. I give it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next, this was a huge surprise for me. I loved almost everything about this book. Not quite 5 stars, but almost. Strange Beasts of China by Yan Ge. So basically every chapter in Strange Beasts of China speaks specifically to a type of beast that lives in this Chinese city. There's just so much great commentary about Chinese society in this book, and basically from beginning to end, this author is just dragging Chinese government, society, so many elements about this, which, you just change the word beasts for a certain minority group, and it's basically that. Like, you add some fantastical elements, and you get this, and there are some beasts, some chapters, certain beasts, which are just so good, so powerful. I do think it falters a little bit at the end, but overall, this book is just fantastic. If you're interested in reading translated Chinese literature, this is a great place to start. It was for me, and I will definitely be reading more translated Chinese fiction going forward. Highly recommend. 4.75 out of 5 stars. So this book is actually interesting for me to mention now because I attempted to make a vlog reading this about a month ago, and that vlog attempt was a fail for many reasons, but it was a 5-star read for me. I really enjoyed this book, and I read The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. It's just a great book. I'm sure you've heard about it. It's labeled a romance, and it kind of is. I mean, ultimately, it's a love story and a very beautiful one, but it's the kind of romance and love story which works for me. The first 200 pages, there is no romance, but then after, and the book is 500 pages long, it takes its time building the world, building its characters. The romance doesn't define the characters or the story, but it's just the nice backdrop for the book. And this cover, gorgeous. Look at this, beautiful. Anyway, so The Night Circus, fantastic book. I had a couple of minor nitpicks here and there. There's one character I just don't care about. And he has several chapters in this book. If you've read it, it's Bailey. I don't care about Bailey, sorry. I know he serves his purpose at the end, but Erin, you could have done better by him as a character. You could have made him a little bit more interesting, a little bit more. But I think that was the point. Anyway, moving on. Great book. Highly recommend. If you haven't read it, I'm sure you have. So next on the list, we have by E. Reyes, a collection of short stories about Christmas time and other holiday times after Halloween called Christmas in the Empty Cabin and Other Holiday Tales. So I've read a couple of other things by E. Reyes before, The House on Moon Creek Avenue, and I've read The Halloween Grindhouse, which is a collection of short stories, Grindhouse short stories. The thing is, E. Reyes, I really respect him and appreciate him as a writer. I'm really glad that E. Reyes is in the horror community, that he's writing stories, because even though his writing style is not the most polished or the most beautiful, he knows what his inspirations are, He knows what his tropes are, and he knows how to use those to his advantage, creating a story, because his stories are wild. They're very inventive, very imaginative, and they're just gruesome and bloody and crazy. And this is, however, my least favorite by the three works by Reyes that I've read. There's nothing necessarily wrong with this, but the thing is, it's just so tiny. Like, this is a really short collection of stories, and I think there are only, yeah, there are one, two, three, four, five, six. There are six stories in this. It's only about 80 pages. One of the stories is literally 2 pages long. So even though this is really short, Christmas in the Empty Cabin does have my first 5-star short story by E. Reyes, which I'm very happy about because I'm very happy to support him and love his work. I really love A Scurry Furry Christmas, which is, if you're interested in holiday horror, especially Christmas horror, I feel like A Scurry Furry Christmas is basically Gremlins meets like Latin magic sorceress meets consumerism and capitalism. A Scurry Furry Christmas is really funny. It's gruesome, and it's just a really good time with like a great holiday Christmas conclusion as well. Great story. Yeah, like the rest isn't too remarkable just because it's too short, but overall, E. Reyes is a good time. If I can get anyone to read his books or short story collections, I'm very happy to do it. I would not start with this one, but if once you've read some other things by him and you're curious to collect this as well, I highly recommend it as well. Next on the chopping block, we have We Spread by Iain Reid. So the thing about We Spread is that this is a very philosophical book, and it takes a very philosophical and existential approach to questions of life and death and aging, and it just does a beautiful job asking those questions, making those statements, which are very hard and heavy to hear and process and think about over the course of these 200 odd pages. And it just culminates in a beautiful send off to life and death, and that these are two things which go hand in hand, and that no matter what happens to us in our life, that the experiences that we've had, the memories that we've created, and the people that we've had are still there. I love this book. I really, really enjoy this book. Easy 5 stars. I'm sure you've heard about it by now, but if you haven't, then highly recommend. Next. I told you I read heavy stuff. Next, I have The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reid. So Ava Reid has very quickly in 2022, she became my favorite author, at least amongst these contemporary writers. I mean, I've only read 2 of her books. I've given both of them 5 stars. Juniper and Thorn was my favorite book published in 2022, and this one was released in 2021, I believe. And shockingly, I actually like this a little more than Juniper and Thorn. They're very different stories, and they talk about very different things, but overall, as a story, and the world building and the universe and just the scope of what this book has to say versus Juniper and Thorn is just so much more impressive. Now, so this book manages not only to be an epic high fantasy, but also manages to be a deeply personal and intimate story about self-discovery. And the most important thing for me about this book is that it talks about how we can learn to understand other people through communication. We don't see eye to eye on the same thing, but through dialogue and communication, we can learn to, if not agree, but understand each other. And that's where I feel like the main relationship between Evike and I already forgot his name. But he was a great character. But Evike, the lead in this, Evike develops a very beautiful relationship with this man who she does not see eye to eye with at all. But over the course of time, she learns to, even if not agree with him, but learns his perspective and where he comes from his perspective. And I think that's just something that is just beautiful to explore because it's just how people are. People just are going to fight and disagree because they don't understand or don't want to understand. And this book really goes into detail about that and so many other things, which I don't feel like I'm smart enough to fully talk about the scope and power of this book. It is just so well written. It is so well conceived. Just exquisite. Love it. 5 out of 5 stars. The best book I read last year, actually. If I'm being really honest, this for me was the best book that I read in 2022, regardless of when it was published. Read it. It's good stuff. Read it. Next, another 5-star read last year, and one of my favorites published in 2022 as well, The Ghost Woods by C.J. Cooke. This is a fantastic gothic horror novel. Creepy, dilapidated manor, creepy forest, lots of references to mushrooms and fungi. And by the way, I don't like mushrooms. I don't eat mushrooms at all. So mushrooms playing the role that they do in this book, I'm not surprised. They're evil. I don't like them. This book is just, again, so intelligent, so smart. I love what this book has to say about women and about the role that women have in society. This is set in 1950s, 1960s England. It chronicles two main characters from the different time periods, and they have different perspectives as well. And eventually, at the end of the book, their paths do cross, and yeah, we learn about this creepy manor, and we learn a lot about British society in the 1950s and 1960s, and these are things that still have repercussions today in society, and it's just hauntingly written, beautifully well executed, very tender, often very eerie. For me, instant classic, love it, highly recommend, 5 stars. And then, after such a good book, it ain't it, hun. This ain't it. At all. Rules for Vanishing is by far the worst book I read in December. This book is a catastrophe. I don't get why people like this book. I saw a few booktubers recommend it. I don't see it at all. Basically, it has horrible representation for queer people. It has horrible representation for disabled people. The folklore, sorry, not the folklore, the backstory and the entire mythology of this world and everything is just not developed anywhere near well enough. None of it makes sense. It has this multimedia format, which everyone says is like its main calling card, but the multimedia format doesn't do anything really to forward the story. And there's one part of this book where the character is like writing her testimony, but like she's writing it like a novel. Like no 16-year-old girl is gonna write a novel as her testimony. If those testimonial chapters had actually been written from the perspective of a 16-year-old girl instead of being written like a novel, this could have been more successful. But just like so much logic just goes out the window with this. It's just this book is trash. I'm sorry. I really don't like this book, and I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. It probably deserves less, to be honest. However, even though I hated Rules for Vanishing, I'm here for a redemption arc. I'm here for a what's that trope? Enemies to lovers? I don't know. I did not vibe with Rules for Vanishing, but I gave Kate Alice Marshall another chance because a friend of mine really enjoyed this book, and I read 13s, which is a middle grade book. So I feel like a lot of the things which I hated about Rules for Vanishing kind of like can't happen here because it's a middle grade read. And I mean, compared to Rules for Vanishing, this is a masterpiece for sure. But I just don't think Kate Alice Marshall's writing style is really for me. There are elements that I really like in 13s. Like this is, as a middle grade book, I feel like it is very successful in many ways. But overall, I just was not a fan of the protagonist. I did not like her. Yeah, I thought Pip was a much more interesting character to follow. And the true emotional climax of the book is with Pip, not with Eleanor. And yeah, it's just, I mean, it's fine. It's a good, solid middle grade book. I know that this is a series. I could continue the series just to see if, you know, Eleanor as the main character develops, which I hope she does. But yeah, Kate Alice Marshall, not the best introduction. Let's just put it like that. And after I had read Rules for Vanishing, I just really wanted. I was in a Oh. Yes. Okay, so today I've received 2 books in the mail. Super excited. The first one, Queer Little Nightmares, which I've shown in a different video, and I just got The Vegetarian by Han Kang because obviously in March I'm going to go full out with reading a bunch of Korean translated fiction, because of course. So, back to the books. Back to my December wrap up. So, after I read Rules for Vanishing, I was in a bit of a reading slump. It took me like 4 days to finish Rules for Vanishing, which for me is a long time because it's not even a long book at all. But I hated the experience so much, so I just wanted something quick and easy to read. So I read the Drag Dictionary because, obviously. So yeah, I'm kind of a fan of RuPaul's Drag Race. I don't really enjoy RuPaul much with the show these days, but you know, I love a lot of the queens who come from the show, and they're fabulous. And I just saw this at a museum, and I was like, why the hell not? So I read this. It's a cute little picture book. It talks about the different slang that drag queens use. It's just a fun, quick, easy read with nice illustrations and pictures. It's a good time if you're interested in something like this. And then last but not least, I read a young adult queer, mostly queer, horror anthology called The Gathering Dark. So, I have mixed feelings about The Gathering Dark. So, I feel like, again, for young adult readers, I feel like this could be quite successful. For me, I thought 10 or 11 stories, I thought they were 5-star reads. I love the first one in particular, called Stay. It's such a gripping, chilling story. Like, actually, I remember that story. I remember just the sense of dread and the feeling that you get in this story. I feel like out of all of the stories in this book, in this anthology, Stay is the one I feel like has the best chance of being transformed into a novel. I would love to read Stay as a novel. But yeah, that was my one 5-star read. The other 5-star read was It Stays With You. And by the way, just to be nice to the authors, so Stay was written by Erica Waters, and It Stays With You was written by Aidan Polidoros. This book was just really fun to read because, again, I'm always available for queer literature. I love queer representation. I love horror. This was just really up my alley in so many ways. I do feel like, as it says, it's an anthology of folk horror. I feel like as a folk horror collection, this fails a bit because not a lot of this anthology actually reads as folk horror, and a lot of the stories and a lot of the themes do repeat a lot, which is basically kids in a small town bored, not much to do, and they just go into hijinks because like there's nothing else to do, and they're just kind of like, and a lot of the characters in these stories are just not interesting or good. But I feel like that's real to the teenage experience because they're teenagers, and a lot of these stories do have great themes and messages, and some of the horror in this book is effective. Scary, maybe not, but some of the horror is at least very effective. And yeah, that's a wrap. So, 2022, I ended with 15 reads in December. These are all of them. And yeah, there were like several 5-star reads in this. I think 4, which is the most 5-star reads I gave in any month last year. So several 5-star reads, several all-time favorites. I had a great time reading in December. And yeah, even with the flops like Kate Alice Marshall, all that was fine because it was a good month otherwise. So yeah, that was December for me, and I'm very happy to continue my reading experiments and adventures in 2023. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you on the flip side. Bye.